Welcome back to Metal Sanctuary. Again, we have the infamous Buddy Porter with me to do a ranking instead of a top five debate this time. We're going with the Joey Belladonna era Anthrax records. So instead of doing a top five because there are only 6 albums, we're going to go ahead and just rank all six 1 to 6. Plus, it's a metal number, so that's what we're going to do. A little bit of background on this band. The first record came out in 1984, which was Metal Thrashing Mad, or excuse me, A Fistful of Metal, which had the song Metal Thrashing Mad, which is why I get so confused every time. Which came out in 1984, which they had Neil Turbin on vocals at that point in time. Turbin would later on go to front Skid Row for a short period of time, never actually recording an album with them. And then after that, it was Belladonna for a few records. And then they brought in former Armored Saint singer and now current Armored Saint singer John Bush for a few records. And then they brought back Joey Belladonna for, I want to say it was 2010 album, Worship Music. And then just last year, they released For All Kings. So, let's get into this, and we'll start with number 6. I'll give you the honors on your number 6.
My number 6 is the most recent album, For All Kings, and it's probably just at number 6 because I don't have a whole lot of experience with the album, I guess you could say. I haven't really listened to a whole lot of it because it didn't really sit well with me the first couple of times I listened to it.
I have that one ranked higher. I got a chance. I probably listened to it about 3 or 4 times completely all the way through. I like that record a lot, and I'm not trying not to say too much about that one for where I have that one ranked. But for me, that record was a little thrashier than Worship Music was. I think Worship Music had some spots on it, but I think that For All Kings did a little bit better of a job to it, and then they still had a lot of a groove element to it. They had what I think some of Joey Belladonna's best melodies on that record. But for my number 6, I put The Persistence of Time. And, it's not a horrible record at all. And to be ranked number 6 on this list is no slight to that record. But I do think, for as many songs as were on that record, I only think there was about 6 or 7 that really stood out for me on that one. So that's why I have that one ranked number 6.
I love the Persistence of Time album from top to bottom. I thought it was a fantastic album.
All right, what'd you put at number 5?
Number 5, I have Worship Music. And the only reason why these newer albums, like I said, I don't have a whole lot of experience with For All Kings and Worship Music, and I think it's just the old school thrasher in me, the kid that grew up with, Anthrax from the 80s. So to me, those albums are like the core albums. So they're of course going to be higher on my list.
Right. And for me, I got into Anthrax kind of on a late jump. I think the first thing I ever had from them was that Attack of the Killer Bees. And there was something about it. I don't know if it was just because I know I'm the Man was on there. And there are like a couple other like silly type songs that I really just, I don't know, I didn't get into them for a while. And then I got the Anthology, which was a double disc, and I believe it was mainly Belladonna era. I want to say completely, but I'm not sure. I want to say there was like a couple Bush songs on there. That really kind of got me into them a little bit. And then it really wasn't until, I want to say it was Guitar Hero 3 came out, and the song Madhouse was on there. And that's when I really kind of started getting into them. And that was like around 2007, 2008-ish. So, I got to the Anthrax party a little late. So for me, that's, I guess, kind of the reason why I think the last 2 records with Belladonna have really, I don't know, stuck with me a little bit more. Just because Anthrax, to me, I think they're thrashy in some aspects, but in some aspects I really consider them to be more speed metal, primarily because of the vocals. Because in general terms, when you're talking about thrash bands, we're talking about more aggressive style vocals, and Anthrax was very devoid of that. Even when they brought John Bush in, who is a very good singer in his own right. But I also went with worship music on for number 5. It's a record that I think had slightly less holes than Persistence of Time for me. I really loved the song in the end where they were dedicating to Dimebag Darrell and to Ronnie James Dio. I loved songs like Giant. The song Fight 'Em Till You Can't had a real AIR type feel to me. The way the riffs were going on that song, which is also my personal favorite Anthrax song, AIR. So that's probably why I really dig that song and this record just a little bit more.
Worship music to me was kind of like a step away from, it could have been the album that was released in between Among the Living and State of Euphoria.
Right.
It could have been the album that was in between there, but to me it just fell flat in a few spots. And it's kind of like they dropped the ball. Like they would get almost there, and then they would lose it, like in a breakdown or in a riff in the chorus. And to me, it was kind of like it was rushed.
Well, that record also
wrote the album and then went in and recorded it.
Well, that record we remember it was in the makings for 2 or 3 years, and they had to shelf the original version. They had Dan Nelson singing on it. And then, bringing Joey back in the band, the songs were already written, and the lyrics were already written. He was really singer for hire in a band he'd been in for, a decade plus. And then, that one seemed to me, when you say seemed kind of rushed, the record itself had been written for a while. I think what was rushed was bringing Joey Belladonna into the mix. I think that maybe they could have kept a few songs and then let him be in some of the input on some other songs maybe written. But at the time they had been writing this record for a while, so they probably were some kind of in a time crunch with label and management. I kind of think that this record is like I would consider it to be their Black album in the instance that it kind of sounds like something Bob Rock would have produced with an 80s thrash band and gave them more of the groove and rock feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely some of Belladonna's best vocals ever recorded, but he didn't get a say in how the melodies were and in between the rhythms and the way his voice is. And some of the songs, like I said, the guitar kind of falls off, and it doesn't fit with his voice.
Well,
it's like because it wasn't written for him to sing; it was written for somebody else to sing.
Right, but also one of the things that draws me back to that song, "Fight Until You Can't," that reminds me a lot of, with Scott Ian doing backup vocals, reminds me a lot of Indians.
Yeah, it does. Like I said, it could have been the album that came in between Among the Living and State of Euphoria if Belladonna would have had more input, like, changing the melodies to actually suit the way he sings.
Let's get into your number 4.
My number 4 is their debut with Belladonna, Spreading the Disease. I mean, it was one of the first Anthrax albums that I got. I got Spreading the Disease and Among the Living at the same time on cassette. And, I mean, it's just a brutal album. I love it from, top to bottom and, just really thrashy. And Belladonna's vocals, on that album are, I like it because they're raw. It was almost like, the album was like a bunch of demos. And to me, it had that kind of a demo kind of feel to it.
Well, it also, with Belladonna being that's the first one he was on, to me, I think he had a lot to prove. being the new guy in the band, and I think a lot of bands that have done one record come back and have to do the next record with a new vocalist. Not just the fact that it has my favorite Anthrax song on it, AR is on that record. Also, it was in my earlier video today. I think I ranked that record 5th for the year that it came out in 1985. I have that one a little higher up, but we'll get to that in a little bit. My number 4 is probably ranked higher for you simply because I do consider it to be an underrated record. State of Euphoria is my number 4.
I have it a little higher up on my list, and well, I guess I can say it. It's my number 3. To me, it's like Anthrax came out. They came out of the gates on this album and just hit the ground running. I mean, it's like it was almost like it's like they were trying. Like it would be like a comeback album, but they didn't have anything to come back from because Among the Living is one of the greatest thrash albums of all time. Greatest metal albums of all time from top to bottom.
It's kind of like it's that pitfall you get into when you have a great record. How do you can't top it, but you can still be solid. And it's kind of like, when Rain and Blood came out, that was the most brutal thing that had ever came out. The most natural step was to be a little bit different on the next record. Didn't make the next record any, worse, but it just happened to follow a really great record.
Yeah, and when they say this, I don't know what it is about State of Euphoria. It's like a typical thrashy sounding album. It's kind of even a little different for Anthrax, but it's like I said, it's almost like they felt like they had something to prove after doing Among the Living, and they just came out. I mean, they knocked it out of the park. It's a great album, solid from top to bottom.
So we just transitioned. I believe you said that's your number 3.
Yes.
Okay. Well, my number 3, I actually went with one that you ranked a little lower, and I went with For All Kings. I rank it that high because I've had some time with it, and I just think with the way belladonna sings, I think especially the last 2 records have been, whether you want to say worship music was rushed or not, I think especially for this record right here, this is kind of maybe the sound they should have gone when they brought belladonna in. Because as much as I love Anthrax, there's something about it that doesn't quite always fit with the thrashy nature of the music and then belladonna's vocal style. It's kind of it's like a imperfect balance where it really works only for Anthrax, but they could have done a different job, and that's why I think For All Kings is higher on my list.
Yeah, I really need to sit down with that album and give it its fair due. I mean, I haven't had time between work and moving a lot and my surgeries and stuff. I just haven't had time to give it its due.
Well, you were laid up for like 2 weeks. That was plenty of time to get into it.
I was getting caught up on TV shows. That's going on.
I have a feeling I know where you're going with number 2.
My number 2 is Among the Living, which is going to piss off a lot of Anthrax fans.
It doesn't necessarily piss me off, but it does kind of aggravate me because it totally shocked me because that's not where I was expecting you to go.
I love the Among the Living album, and I mean it's great. You've got iconic songs on the album. You can every song on there. It's great. It's one of those albums where when you listen to it, you just it brings back childhood memories. You want to hear the next song. I mean, the first 3 songs, you can't listen to Among the Living without listening to Cotton the Mosh and then going into High on the Law. It's
Right.
like those three songs go together. Like, you know, the radio, when they play We Are the Champions right after We Will Rock You, or they play Heartbreaker and Living, Loving, Made together. You know, it's those three songs should be played together at all times.
I can't argue with your view on that record. I can only argue with the placement on it, because that, and I'll go ahead and be the one to roll this into the number one spot in just a second, because that's where I have it. But my number two is Spreading the Disease. I think, like you said earlier, very raw record, a little bit of something to prove. I think the production was slightly better than their debut, but I think, you know, you've got AIR on that record. Each song is just, it has the build up from the first song to the last song. It's not an album that if you start listening to it, you know, you can just pause it and then come back to it later. You want to go ahead and go through that whole record. So that's what I have at number. That's what I have at number 2, and then your pick at number 2 is my pick at number 1, Among the Living. It's just, to me, even though my favorite song is on a different record, I just think that record just flows completely through. Especially the song Among the Living. I mean, it's just like there's chant parts to it, and you know, I think especially on the East Coast with the thrash bands, Bobby Blitz even said it of Overkill, and they have a slightly different influence, because Overkill's got more of the punk influence and Anthrax had more of the hardcore influence. They built that specific mosh riff, and I think that Anthrax also built in specific chant parts to get the crowd into it. I think both bands were very conscientious of how the song was going to play out live, and I think that the Among the Living album best shows that for them.
That's why I love the album. It's got a great feeling to it, but that aspect, it seemed to me, I got it at number 2 because it seemed to me like they were trying just a little too hard for the audience participation aspect of the album. And I don't know, it's if I take that aspect out of it, you know, it's a great album. But I think they just tried just a little too hard. It was almost like they were trying to be radio friendly without being radio friendly. They were trying to make metal songs and pop songs at the same time.
Well, also in their area, it was a little easier to be radio friendly and not really try to be that and still be metal, because of the radio shows they have on the East Coast, more specifically Eddie Trunk's show, because he was doing something not a lot of DJs were really doing. He was going into the new, what was still at the time considered an underground movement with thrash.
Yeah, Eddie Trunk's done a lot for metal music and stuff over the years, but to me, like I said, you know, it just, that element was kind of lost on me, which is the reason why a lot of people don't like my number 1 for sure since the time. You know, they say that, you know, they sold out at this point in time, and, you know, they were trying to do that. I didn't get that feel from that record. I thought the Anthrax on this album had finally honed their craft, and I thought that the music still had that raw, thrashy kind of feel, but it blended well enough. I thought it was the best blending between the thrash and belladonna's, you know, more American metal kind of vocal style.
To me, it was the perfect blend of what they do and having really good production for once.
Yes, but I think out of the earlier years, I think it's the best production album musically. I think belladonna's vocals were the best on worship music. vocal-wise recording, not for melodies and harmonies and stuff like that. But the production, the power behind the way that the album was recorded, I mean, it's just an album that I love to crank, and I love to get in my car and just cruise down the road, and I can just listen to that album from top to bottom. It's got a real brutal sound, but it's clean and it flows together, and the melodies of the music mix well with belladonna's vocals.
And another thing, they had a really cool instrumental on there, Into the Reality, which leads into Belly of the Beast. And, I felt like that was kind of like a new thing for them. I never really got the sellout aspect from it either. I know it came out in the era of sellout, I guess 90, 91, somewhere around there when it came out. I just felt that for me to be able to rank it where I did, I thought there were some really great songs on there. Then I thought there were some songs that kind of, really didn't do it for me. But I mean, you got, plus you had the Got the Time cover, which was, that's a bass riff that sticks in my head like all the time. Trying to get some kind of consensus rank out of this because we are all over the place on this. Because your number 1 is my number 6. We both had the same number 5, so I'm going to go ahead and pencil worship music in at number 5. So at least we got one correct together. You've got what is this? You've got State of Euphoria at 3. I've got it at 4. I've got no problem putting State of Euphoria at 3, and because the only reason I put it below For All Kings is that's a record I'm really into, but I can understand because you haven't had a lot of time to process that one. I can knock that from 3 to 6 just because I understand where you're coming from on that. Let's see, at 4 you had
Before I have
Spreading the Disease. I had that way up at 2. If you can give me Spreading the Disease at 4, I'll give you Persistence of Time at 3, Among the Living. It's Persistence of Time at 2, Among the Living at 1.
I can live with that. Among the Living, it's a great album, and you can't go wrong with any song on it. I think I like the production better, the production aspect, and the bigger, bolder sound of,
right.
Persistence of Time.
All right, so this is how we've got it. At number 6, For All Kings. At number 5, Worship Music. At number 4, Spreading the Disease. Number 3, State of Euphoria. Number 2, Persistence of Time, which I have labeled as Pot. And at number 1, Among the Living.
So essentially my list, 1 and 2 reversed.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. But, but like I said, the only reason I felt comfortable putting my 6 a little higher and my 3 a little lower were because you haven't had as much time with the For All Kings record, and I think if you'd had some more time with it, I think you probably could have ranked it at least higher than Worship Music. It's hard because these 2 new records, as great as they are, it's coming up against an era for Anthrax that was just so great. I think in those consecutive records, those 4 records that Belladonna was a part of to begin with, that's a hard era for other bands to compare to.
Yeah, it is. Essentially those 4 Anthrax albums were, throughout my childhood, essentially. When Persistence of Time came out, I was 14, 15 years old, and it was just a couple of years before that, when State of Euphoria came out, I heard the album, my buddy was playing it, And I went out looking for it, and I couldn't find it. So I bought Among the Living and Spreading the Disease. They were both $5 cassettes at the time, because they were older albums. So I got two for the price of one, because essentially most cassettes in my teenage years, were about $8.99 to $9.99, depending on where you bought them at.
And if you ended up having to get them at one of the bigger record stores, you're looking at about $10-12.
Yeah. So.
Well, I think we got a pretty good arranging of these albums. I had a feeling there was going to be a lot of difference between where we both put the last two. I mean, you got them at 5 and 6, and I had them at 5 and 3. But anyway, that's our top 6. If you got a top 6 that's different, put it in the comments. Like, subscribe, tell your friends. And we're going to...
Until next time.
Until next
Stay
time.
heavy.
God bless.